Welcome to Jahmi Rock's Jottings, your seriously silly space to hear deep insights on music, especially reggae and samba reggae. It is my intention to share meaningful musicological arguments and observations to inspire and, frankly, pass my doctoral exams. Welcome all. I'm your host, Jahmi Rock, aka Racquel Bernard. Let's start jamming. Welcome to the season one finale. Yes, I said it, finale of Jahmi Rock's Jottings. Thank you to all my listeners. You've stayed with me this far, and now exams are around the corner. So it's time for me to lean into the written muscles of formatting and citations to prepare for the big push. Today, we will be focusing on framing Rastas as musical Maroons through Margareth Menezes' song Rasta Man. You'll also hear me gesturing toward the research that comes after I hopefully, prayers up, pass my exam. Now, to review from our last episode, Maroons are once enslaved Africans who resisted and founded free communities in the Americas, especially the Caribbean and Circum-Caribbean for our purposes. Maroonage is then the noun for these acts of resistance. Urban maroonage and erotic maroonage are, as recounted by Raquel Rivera and Lisa Tomlinson, are attempts to contemporize this concept and use it as a metaphor for African descended acts of resistance in neoliberal and neocolonial contexts. Now, let me stop for a moment and define neoliberal, because I will be honest, I had heard this term a lot for several years, but I am just now more deeply grasping it. To define it, I'll turn to the first scholar on our roster this week, Miguel de la Torre, who edited the volume The Hope of Liberation in World Religions. De la Torre's research interests are social ethics, theology of liberation, Latinx religiosity, and Santeria. In the introduction of the volume, he explains neoliberalism is a relatively new economic term coined in the late 1990s to describe the social and moral implications of global market imperialism, in parentheses, capitalism, and its free trade policies revived, hence the word neo, or the part of the word neo, since the collapse of the Eastern Bloc. I'm going to say it one more time for you because it was a lot. Neoliberalism is a relatively new economic term coined in the late 1990s to describe the social and moral implications of global market imperialism or capitalism and its free trade policies revived, hence NEO, since the collapse of the Eastern Bloc. De la Torre does an impressive analogy of how this economic term expands out into unfair treatments of people made poor by its organizational structure. The way he explains this in terms of faith suits my organization of gender and spirituality in post-colonial liberation musics. As you listen to De La Torre's analogy, I want you to consider that reggae Rastas liberate by singing of their faith, and their faith is based on a commitment to those who are suffering. De La Torre explains, neoliberalism is a quote unquote spirit, which encompasses both an emerging culture and a corresponding morality that justify the economic arrangements brought about by neoliberalism, an economic arrangement that more often than not dehumanizes those made poor by neoliberalism. When the world's disenfranchised are commodified, cultural consequences follow, specifically the disintegration of communal and familial life. As the world's poor compete with each other in the race to the bottom of global compensation, traditional institutions that foster faith also suffer, not due to lack of interest, but lack of time, as more waking hours are expended in pursuit of the basic necessities of life: food, clothing, and shelter. This is the nature of the post colonial world where time is made scarce. I argue that Rastas as Maroons reframe senses of time through their daily activities and style of movement. What academics call coloniality is what Rastafari call Babylon. In an attempt to combine the two, I offer the term Babyloniality. Babyloniality, for me, refers to the structure of serving money regardless of the effects of economic dehumanization. Delatorre contextualizes the work of colonial powers to frame this quote unquote white man's burden as bringing civilization and Christianity to the world's heathens and savages, understood as non whites. He continues, today, rather than bringing the natives civilization, we bring them democratization, the new buzzword. He frames this as the gospel of neoliberalism. Musical Maroons of this period chant down the neoliberal Babylon. Delatorre will be joined on this episode's scholar roster by Rosemary Redford Ruther, Hope Monroe, and Lycia Fielmata. Taking them together, I will explore how women's voices shape how we understand Rastas as musical Maroons in my wider field. Liberation musics like reggae and samba reggae have distinct rhythms and dances associated with them. So Rasta Man, the tune that I'm talking about today, which I've grown to love over the years, plays with these distinct rhythms and dances. The song's instrumentation is a Brazilian hail to the organization of reggae tunes. The engagement of the organ, the percussive style of the keyboard, the walking groove of the bass guitar, the sway of the horn section, as well as the signature guitar upward strumming, alert the listeners that they are now entering reggae sound. Menezes, with her background singers, sing ja 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 la 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 ja 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 la 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 la. Notice they hail Jah at the very top because the figurative Rastaman cannot be understood without Jah. Menezes sings in a skillful delivery the following words. Eu vou contar a história de Rastaman que viajou o mundo inteiro demonstrou na sua vitrola solo rovalo reggae clássico. Gregory Isaacs, Bob Marley, seu sucesso. As suas trancas passeavam na cintura, na sua cabeça uma chuca tricolor. Jogava bola lá na rua onde morava. Fim de semana batucava seu tambor. Now, don't hate me too much for that one. I was trying to sing it in her style, but also say it because I do not have that dexterity in the language of Portuguese yet to get her exact, her exact cadences. That's gonna take me a few more deep listenings and learning. But I love that song, and Menezes does this brilliant vocal dexterity to pack all that in. And what it means is I will tell the story of a Rastaman who traveled the world by subway. Only classic reggae played on his record player. Gregory Isaacs, Bob Marley, only success. His locks hung around his waist. On his head, a tricolor cap. He played ball on the street where he lived. On the weekend, he beat his drum. Menezes lays out the activities of the Rasta Men, name dropping two reggae superstars, Gregory Isaacs and Bob Marley. Then the chorus goes, reggae, essa cara dança reggae, reggae, mas o maluco mais homem bom. Rasta Man, essa cara dança reggae, Rasta Man, mas o maluco mais homem bom. Which means Reggae. This guy dances reggae. Reggae. A little crazy, but a good man. Rasta Man. This guy dances reggae. Rasta Man. A little crazy, but a good man. Rasta Man by Margareth Menezes does a beautiful job of sonically expressing the way Rastafari are understood from a non Jamaican perspective. I want to hone in on the explanation that this Rasta man was a little crazy but a good man. This craziness I attribute to the insistence that reality should not be how it is. It's a craziness that is prophetic, a goodness that believes that humanity should be held to a higher standard than what Delator calls a race to the bottom. The migration of Rasta culture from Jamaica to Brazil that is referenced in this story calls my attention to the ways that migration in neoliberal context plays out. Just like the Maroons who kept their African Orishas, Rastafari keep Jah. Spirituality is resistance. To put faith in a source higher than the human post colonial powers. As we discussed before, power is always everywhere. There is no outside to power. And spirituality is a way to harness one's individual power by connecting to a higher source. In Rosemary Redford Ruther's chapter on Catholicism in Delator's edited volume, we gain a deeper understanding and sense of what the post colonial context looks like in Brazil. She explains, beginning in 1964 with the Brazilian coup, a new kind of military regime emerged in Latin America. This national security state might be described as a kind of colonial fascism dependent on foreign aid from neo-colonial centers of power, which acts as a conduit for economic exploitation on behalf of the interests of these outside powers. Rastafari, like Peter Tosh, stood against global fascism. Fascism's dictionary definitions are first, a political philosophy, movement, or regime, such as that of the fascista, and excuse my pronunciation there for those who know how to say it better, that exalts nation and often race about the individual, and that stands for an centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader. Severe economic and social regimentation and forcible suppression of the opposition. Secondly, it means a tendency toward or actual exercise of strong autocratic or dictatorial control. Tosh had songs that sang against apartheid and nuclear war for resistance, and nuclear war, for instance. In a previous episode, you heard me recount the lyrics of Bob Marley's War. Rastafari take global news very seriously and they put it in their reggae music. Now, to be sure, you do not have to be a Rasta to make reggae music, but you cannot make authentic reggae music without respecting the values of Rastafari. Even if you don't believe in the divinity of Emperor Haile Selassie, I think you should respect the space of a reggae gathering by responding to the artist's Hail of Jah with an enthusiastic Rastafari. Those are just observations by me, someone who takes a spiritual umbrella, and in that spiritual umbrella, I look to Rastafari, I look to Judaism, I look to Christianity. That's where I ground my faith. And so when I think of Jah, I'm thinking of the biblical Jah, who is interpreted through various stances, through various religious faiths. And so I believe in Jah and I respect Rastafari. Now, Menezes sang, Mi umaluku mazmo membo, Rasta Man, Mi umaluku mazmo membo. Right? Rastafari are musical maroons who shake up the ideologies of oppressive societies create. They shake up those ideologies. In my field, I'm interested in the ways women of color, especially Black women, engage in their own shaking up of oppressive ideologies. Imagine that Akotareni and Nani, these maroon women leaders who of these places that are in our northeast Brazil and northwest Jamaica, imagine that Okitareni and Nani are succeeded by female urban Maroons who do their best to resist neoliberal constraints. This brings us beyond reggae and samba reggae. At this time, we turn to Hope Monroe, who wrote What She Go Do, Women in Afro-Trinidadian Music, published in 2016. Monroe's fields are ethnomusicology, music history, world music, and Caribbean studies. Monroe's work answers gender questions around calypso and soca music. So let's listen into a few observations around soca music in particular. Soca music, a modern development on the musical ideas in calypso, was an accompaniment to the sense of fun and freedom that women experience at these fetes, and appeared to be a way that they could cut loose regardless of what other obligations they might be facing in daily life. Monroe says, I had discovered that there was a strong feminist movement in Trinidad, making it possible for women to make enormous gains in equal access to education, employment, and equal pay during the second half of the 20th century. There are some ways that education and employment are wedded to oppressive systems. Disenfranchisement of women is part of a legacy of sexist oppression. So for this project that I'm doing, I take parts of what Monroe hands out here. For this project that Monroe does on Afro-Trinidadian music, it's necessary for her to stake out the feminist history of Trinidad from where Calypso rose and others sings. Monroe continues, women popular musicians participate in a vernacular feminist project that resists domination while at the same time inspiring audiences to question the relations that cause domination in their own lives. I too am interested in vernacular feminist projects that resist domination in Jamaica and Brazil. On this season of Jahmi Rocks Jottings, my goal was to start defining the field of gender and spirituality in post-colonial liberation musics. My returning listeners will remember my call to lovers of reggae and samba reggae, promising to shed light on artists like Judy Mowatt, Gal Costa, Margareth Menezes, or Marsha Griffiths, really any pioneering woman of color. In episode 1, I emphasized Judy Mowatt, who was a member of the I Tree, that's Bob Marley's female backup singers group, along with Rita Marley and Marsha Griffiths. Black woman lays out sexist oppression, so I suggest that Mowatt is operating as a musical maroon chanting down racism and sexism in that tune. What I am proposing with this field is difficult because the reggae industry is very masculine at first glance. Reggae scholarship is also full of attention to Bob Marley. I can admit my own desire to do research on Bob when I was a student at University of the West Indies, and my teacher, Dr. Waller, pointed me towards Peter Tosh instead due to my primary interest in music for social change. Like, I'm still interested in music for social change. The ways I think about music and social change are not just along class, race, and sex lines. Those are just 3 factors I'm limiting in my own academic project. I also want to acknowledge that gender is complicated by sexuality. And even though I'm not broaching sexuality as definitively in my dissertation, perhaps in the future I'll have a project that focuses on love so that I can venture more deeply into gender and sexuality dynamics that I limit in this phase of my research. I now turn briefly to one vernacular feminist project that Licia Fiel-Mata explores in her book, The Great Woman Singer, Gender and Voice in Puerto Rican Music. Fiel-Mata's fields and research keywords include Spanish and Portuguese, feminism in the Americas, hemispheric Latin American and Latinx literary and cultural studies, music, popular culture, feminist and queer studies, psychoanalysis, Latin American and Latinx literature, gender, sexualities, race, film, art, and popular culture. Feel Matter speaks of singer Lucecita Benitez, who came of age in Operation Bootstrap, Puerto Rico. Feel Matter discusses Lucecita's performance of Genesis in 1969 at Premier Festival de la Canción Latina, saying, in Lucecita's case, no scripts were available to subordinate and tame her eruption. She was not feminine. She did not sing softly or croon about heterosexual love. She claimed the masculine prerogatives of expressing social and political ideas outside of marriage and motherhood, eschewing the roles that her manager sought to implant in her earliest persona. When it came to representing difference, decked in her stage costume that night in Mexico and armed with her mind blowing delivery, she proved she had no intention of merely supplying a commercial hook to sell songs. Performances can be liberating indeed. What Feel Matter brings up here is the resistance of making music simply to make money. I argue that musical maroons are not usually commercial successes, although a musical maroon subsists from their musical labor. A celebrity's refusal to be pigeonholed as commercial is another interesting point I may contend with in the future. Liberation musics can and do sell, but more importantly, they bring people together. I end here on my attempt to contextualize the term musical maroons for my future project. I could continue, but there will be, of course, more time for that. Now, for my listeners who are wondering, my exams will require me to write 30 to 36 pages about my field in gender and spirituality in post colonial liberation musics that answer three questions my exam committee gives me. I'm asking for good thoughts and positive energy from my listeners as I embark on this journey. Thank you for giving me the extra push to study and explain as I move through some of the pieces on my bibliography. Season 2 of JRJ will come in 2024, Jah willing. Thank you for joining me for this season 1 finale of Jahmi Rocks Jottings. I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe and hop on over to my artist page to hear some music that I hope changes the world for at least one soul. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok at Jahmi Rock. I look forward to sharing more musical moments with you next year. Take care and keep jamming.